what we are trying during all these discussions and talks here is to see if we cannot radically bring about a transformation of the mind.
Okay, everybody. Good evening, and
Good evening.
welcome to the International Center for Sustainability, the ICfS. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. And for some of you who have been here for other talks, welcome back. I'm glad you are here. Before I get started, my name is Ornisha Dauriang. I am a researcher and head of Future of Faith Desk. And let me introduce ICfS to some of you who are new to the center. So we are a registered charity, a think tank that founded under 2 years old. We do research, peer-to-peer training, and policy advocacy between UK, US, and India. And in a nutshell, our job is to nudge a systemic thinking approach towards sustainability. And within that, we have the strengthening democracy, mutual and security dependence. We're looking at AI, healthcare, education, and faiths. So you are here today as our first K lecture of this year. And you might be wondering, what is K lecture? So K stands for Krishnamurti. He is the guy on your right. He is a great philosopher who advocated for a particular set of philosophy that is being discerning, self-inquiry, and critical. So K-Lecture is a platform where you can have difficult ideas. You can discuss the difficult, the tough ideas that you might not find it easy to discuss elsewhere. But within this space, you're free to have a sensible conversation. We hold K-Lecture monthly, and at the end of every month, we will invite experts to share their ideas and thoughts. And I'm so delighted to have Aislinn and Paul with us today. And I will introduce them in a moment. Before that, let me do quickly on the housekeeping rules. So phone, please make sure that you put them on silent. And feel free to take pictures, take more. Make sure that you don't disturb anyone, and make sure that the three of us look really nice. Okay, that's a rule. So you know that this event is being recorded, and in a few weeks' time, we will upload it in our YouTube channel. Toilets, the door over there. Turn right, two stair for men and 1 stair for women. And lastly, tonight we are not expecting any fire alarm. So if there is one, this is real, okay? It's real. So what you should do is please follow our teams and they will guide you out. So let's begin to this evening. Next to me are Aislinn May and Paul Salahuddin Armstrong. So Aislinn is a director at a global accounting and advisory firm. Alongside her professional career, she has spoken publicly about her personal background as an ex-Muslim. So Aislinn was born and raised as Muslim, but later on she chose to live Islam. Paul is a British Muslim leader, the managing director of the Association of British Muslims, and this is the oldest Muslim organization in the UK. And he is also a Muslim chaplain at the University of Birmingham. So in contrast to Aislinn, Paul wasn't born in Islam, but later on he chose to embrace Islam. So together tonight, they will bring a very interesting experience and perceptions that will enrich our discussion. This talk, as Fire has suggested and bring you here, is about women's rights, the unmaking of women's rights in the Middle East. And this topic is really, really timely, especially when we're looking at what's happening to Iran in the past weeks. And before we get into the conversation, I would like to give some context to you that actually when it's come to women's rights in Muslim majority society, we have seen two kind of trends. First one is we see the real progress idea towards women's rights. But on the other hand, we also see that there is a clear reversal. So the question is, why? What brings to these different trajectories? And why we here in the UK should be discussing about this topic. So now I'd like to open the conversation to both of you, and I'd like to give both of you around 5 to 7 minutes to share, to introduce yourself, and share your own journey with Islam and how that shaped. How do you see what happenings in those countries? Aislinn, maybe I begin with you first.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think I'd just like to start first by saying thank you. And I mean this genuinely, thank you to everyone who's given up part of their Wednesday evening to be here, as Onisha said, for a very important discussion. But also thank you to everyone here at the ICfS for being both brave and bold to have this as your first K lecture. So thank you. I was going to start with, well, who am I to talk about this topic? But Onisha's let the cat out of the bag. So as Onisha said, I grew up in Islam and I am an ex-Muslim. I left Islam some years ago at the age of 19. And before we go any further, let me tell you quite categorically that the journey of apostasy is different in Islam than it is in any other religion. It's not the same as being an ex-Buddhist, an ex-Hindu, or even an ex-Christian. It's fundamentally quite different. What I'd like to do with the minutes that I have is share a little bit, share some experiences, share some memories of my experience of growing up here as a young Muslim woman, and then contrast that and go into looking at what's happening in the world over in Islamic states. So I'm going to call the first the micro and the latter the macro, and I want to see if through this evening, through our discussion, are there parallels to be found. So I'll start off with the micro. I'll share 3 memories. Memory 1. At the age of 5, I was enrolled into my local madrasa, and the very first thing I was taught was the difference between heaven and hell and why these are so important. And the first lesson was the punishment for not wearing the hijab. The afterlife is a really big idea that we explore. And in the afterlife, for every day that you don't wear the hijab, you would be hung, I was taught that you would be hung by the hair on your head over a great big fire or a giant vat of oil. And until every hair was plucked out, you would stay there, you would fall in, you'd burn to a crisp, you'd be brought back to life magically. And I always wondered, how do you do that? But, you know, it's possible. For that process to be repeated over and over again until you'd paid your penance. That was my introduction into womanhood. Memory 2. I've not yet put on the hijab. I'm about 8 years old, but my dad takes it upon himself to tell me and teach me what would be the consequence if he ever saw me walking down the road with a boy. His words were clear and unapologetic. He would shoot me, he would shoot the boy, and then he would shoot himself. Whether he meant that literally or not, he communicated something quite clearly, and that was violence. Shooting me would be my punishment, shooting the boy would be vengeance, and shooting himself would be shame. Memory 3. I'm much older in this memory, you'll be glad to know. I'm working. I've taken a gap year between college and university. And in my workplace, there is a Muslim woman from the same community. And one day I step out for lunch with 2 male colleagues who I work with, obviously. And I must not have been gone for half an hour. That evening, as I come home, my father is ready. He knows what time I left. He knows when I came back. And he's ready to interrogate me to understand why is it that I want to attract questions or arouse questions around my virtue, and why do I want to bring shame to our family. Now, you know, looking back and saying this out loud on stage here, I almost wonder, and you know, is this maybe an experience that Orwell had access to when he wrote his book? But this surveillance culture that I've just described was my everyday life. And one can't help but wonder, if you take this idea, what I've just explained to you, what I've just shared with you, if you take this idea and you take it from the home, you bring it to the community, and then you level it up to the state level, What does that look like? How would that be implemented? And unfortunately, you don't actually have to look far. You mentioned Iran earlier. Iran has taken morality policing into the age of AI. They use AI surveillance and crowdsourcing from citizens to monitor how women dress across Iran. So you can literally go onto your phone and report a woman not dressed appropriately. The consequence of that can be imprisonment, it can be a fine, and if the latest law amendments pass through, that could be up to 10 to 15 years. But it also includes corporal punishment dependent on the judge. That corporal punishment is 74 lashes today, in 2025. Let's look across to Iraq. And I actually want to read something to you. I don't need to tell you about how severe murder is, but I would like to read to you Article 409 from the law in Iraq that provides a legal mitigation. Any person who surprises his wife or one of his female relatives in the act of adultery, or finds her in bed with her partner and kills them immediately, or kills one of them, or assaults one of them so that he or she dies or is left permanently disabled, shall be punishable by a period of detention not exceeding 3 years. The right to lethal defense shall not be used, and the rules of aggravating circumstances shall not be applied against him. That's a direct reading from the law. And those who are listening quite closely, if I've still got your attention, you'll have noted that that mitigation is not symmetrical. It exists simply for men. And I know I've got a time limit, so the final one will be Afghanistan. Most of you will have seen Afghanistan in some way in the news, right? Since the Taliban have come in and taken back a lot of the freedoms that were once there. Women are not allowed to roam. If they are out, they must be fully covered. That is not just their body, it is their faces as well. We're now entering an age where discussions have emerged where both eyes aren't needed and maybe just one is needed to get around. Afghanistan takes this a bit further though, because the responsibility to ensure that women abide by this is actually legally and socially put on the men. So men can go into prison or they can be summoned by the virtue police if a woman in their family is not appropriately covered. So I have 2 points to make in this opening, and one is that women's rights are not abstract. You know, they determine a girl's right to education, they enable a woman to leave violence, they enable women and give them the right to work, to move freely from place to place, but most importantly, to live with dignity. You and I, we in this room, may take those freedoms for granted. When's the last time we thought about how we dress? Do we need to veil or not? Who we love? We have the option to go to work should we choose to and earn a living. But that isn't earned through some merit. That is pure luck that we were born here. And if we were born elsewhere, any of these places I've described to you, those choices wouldn't be ours to make. So that's point one. Point two is having this conversation. I said at the start, this is a necessary and urgent conversation. Having this conversation, I want to be really clear, is not an attack on faith. You know, I'm sure we're going to have a really interesting dialogue. And we would agree that discussing this is not Islamophobia. It is not attacking any one religion. What we are doing is discussing the defense of universal human rights, particularly for women. And that is the right to safety, to legal equality, and to dignity. And my final message is that when women's rights are rolled back anywhere, we weaken universal rights everywhere for everyone. And our silence will only enable that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Salahuddin Armstrong, as I've already been introduced, and I'm the Managing Director of the Association of British Muslims. I'm a Muslim chaplain at the University of Birmingham, and I've been a Muslim for the past nearly 26 years. Before I go any further, I'd just like to say it's very troubling to hear about how you were taught at school. I mean, at madrasa, in the mosque. Anyone who knows about classical Islam would know that the first lesson that should be religion, the traditional Shaykh started with adab. Adab means manners, respect, respecting the human dignity of everyone. And the very fact that they come up with this concocted story about the hijab, and in a way which is a nightmarish thing that it's even hard for us to listen to. I mean, who would tell that to their little girl? I mean, I've got 3 daughters. I would never tell them anything like that, and they don't wear headscarves. Sometimes they do for fun, but they don't, they don't wear it seriously. And I've always told them it's entirely up to them. If you want, if you don't want, you don't want. It's a piece of clothing. And it should be like that. That's what Islam teaches. But then we are dealing with, it's not just Islamism. I was going to say Islamism, but it actually goes beyond Islamism. We're dealing with a set of ideas that come from Islamism. And also, in this particular case, they're mixed with misogyny. And I don't see that in the Islam that I've been taught. But I'm aware it is very, very real. And there are things that I've known about for the past 26 years. And I know, and I thank you for sharing these very difficult things you said, because I've been well and truly aware of them even before I embraced Islam. That there are some communities that they teach things like this, and they put it under an Islamic garb and make out that that is what God requires of us. I mean, anyone who seriously thinks that's what God requires of us, and that you should torture your daughters and threaten them that you're going to kill them and their boyfriends if they walk down the street, has a really sick, perverted idea of God. And this is not the God that I worship. Yeah, I'm very clear on that one. I mean, if we go back to the Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, do you know his first wife was a businesswoman? She was a businesswoman and around 40 years old when she proposed to him when he was 25. And she proposed to him after she'd employed him for a time. She was a merchant, and she sent him away to distances to Syria and to trade in the markets in Damascus, and take the goods that she entrusted with him and bring them back. And she saw something in him, something that she valued, she respected. She saw that how he respected and held her in high regard and dignity and love. And he proposed to her, married her. And he always held her in highest regard. When people mention about later on in his life that the Prophet married other wives, but actually when he was married to Khadijah, he never took another wife. He was completely monogamous during that part of his life. And you can see that after she passed away through natural causes and due to the persecution of the community, that the reason he took other wives later on probably had to do with political reasons and uniting tribes and things. But he always held her in the highest regard. We have other examples of Muslims in the early history of Islam, including the Lady Aisha. I mean, I've deliberately brought here a book of hadith. This is a summary of hadith. But if you go, this takes hadith from Bukhari and Muslim and the traditional canons of hadith. And if you browse through this book, it won't take you very long before you find a hadith narrated by Aisha. And Aisha was one of the Prophet's wives, who was also a scholar of Islam. And what does that mean? People, they just read it and say narrated on the authority of Aisha. Well, yeah, I've just found on the authority of Aisha that she was asked, what did the Prophet of Allah used to do in his house? She replied, he was like a human being, like anyone else. He would remove the insects from his clothes, milk the ewe, and do his own chores. Do his own chores. He wasn't, telling, the wives and the girls to go and do all the chores. He did them. And he actually implored people to do that and to share in the chores of the household. But it doesn't take long to find hadiths narrated by Aisha. Now, what does that mean? That means that Aisha became a teacher after the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed on. And there were people, just like there's a mixed group of people here sitting before us, there would have been a mixed group of people sitting around Aisha. And she would have been telling about things from the Prophet's life and what the Prophet taught her and things that she saw. And she was asked questions and she would narrate that. And this mixed group of people were taking notes. And some time afterwards, when they were finally collected up and compiled, in about 100 or so years later, I think, but then these eventually ended up in the Hadith collections. But they began with Aisha. And she wasn't the only scholar. This book is about women scholars of Islam. And, you know, it's taken from a 40-volume biographical dictionary in Arabic of the Muslim women who studied and taught Hadith. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because they were clearly empowered women that people were taking their religion from, they were taking their guidance from. Just like people go and sit with sheikhs today who strangely seem to be in a lot of places predominantly male. Why is that? When historically that wasn't necessarily the case. And even today, if you go to Indonesia, that's not the case. They have women ulama as well that are just as respected and just as powerful there as the male ulama. So we clearly have a problem here in how religion is being twisted. There's even a treatise of rights here. And it's written in archaic language, and like a lot of old books, includes many things. It's not the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but it does talk about human rights in here. This was written by the Prophet's great-grandson, Ali ibn Hussein. And I was given that when I went to a conference of human rights in Iraq in 2019 that had Sunni and Shia scholars there. So why are we in a situation where women are being disrespected and women are being treated wrongly and, you know, even tortured and abused or even killed in some cases? This is not what the religion is supposed to be teaching, but people are clearly using and twisting things for political agendas. And he's serious. Even I brought this book, Tadakkaratul Awliya, or Memories of Saints. And in this book is a narration of Rabia al-Adawiyya, or Rabia al-Basri, who is one of the great saints of Islam. And she was a woman, and she's looked up to by a lot of men as you know, someone to follow, you know, in their own religious and spiritual life. No, I'm not going to read them to you. But I just brought them along as some examples. And this is just stuff I've pulled off my bookshelf. I'm sure if I'd have took longer, I could have found other things. So it's like there's definitely lots of seeds within Islam that can be used, if we so choose, to develop things on an equitable way. But I think that the thing we have to be careful of here is when you have patriarchy that is dominating, and then it leads, in some cases, to actual misogyny as well. And, you know, human rights, they're always something that, whether for male or women, that we have to be vigilant, we have to watch them, and we mustn't allow other people to take them away from us. And you can guarantee, when they take rights from women, it's not long before they take rights from men too.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Paul. And I think so far, I think all of you have get the sense of the difference and the different context and narrative, what's happening within Islam. It start to be, I would say, confusing and complex from the sense that we're looking what's happening in the media or our understanding. So I think we see more color within it. And I would like to unpack this, that what we have shared so far deeper. So I would like to first start with how can we try to understand the pattern of control, the misogyny that we mentioned, the fear of women. Why do you think why this come from? What are the source of this? Is it something? Yeah, of course we mentioned it could be a political one, and history and culture and religious. But I mean, how can we have a better categories and knowledge to distinguish things? You know. So on that, I would like to start with you. Where these ideas of misogyny are from, in your opinion?
I think you've got the scholar right next to you. But,
both.
Yeah, so, you know, Onicha, I can talk about my lived experience and the ideas that were portrayed to me as I shared, but also things that were quoted, things that have become embedded into the law. In terms of origin, I think, you know, as Paul mentioned, there is misogyny in lots of places that we have to be aware of. But why has it found a natural home here is a question, that's worth exploring. So, just to bring up an example, there are practices that are pre-Islamic, right? So, for example, female genital mutilation, right? That is a tribal culture that is found in parts of Africa.
Yeah.
But it then became rife within the Muslim community in Africa. So why is it that it is accepted and then propagated so easily is also something quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
From it's gone from cultural to adopted by a religion and then proliferated. Now, I'm not saying every Muslim community does that, but it was embraced there. So it's definitely a seed that seems to be present, right? Now, there are definitely interpretations of religious text that can point to it. And, I'm sure we'll have a discussion about whether it's a correct interpretation, whether it's a misinterpretation, whether it needs to be interpreted for the 21st century. The fact is they exist, right? So I grew up in a tradition where at the age of 9, for girls, you are mature. At the age of 15, boys are mature. There is a difference automatically, right, in terms of maturity. Now you can laugh and joke and say, yes, boys develop later. But at the age of 9, you were telling a young girl, your virtue, your virginity is now your responsibility and the responsibility of everyone in your family because you are legally able to get married, right? If you look at what Iraq has just done by rolling back personal law, families can choose whether, when they enter into marriage or when their child gets married, whether they're going to follow Jafri law or the state law. And if they follow Jafri law, girls as young as 9 can get married today.
Could you please elaborate what is Jafri law?
So it's a school of thought that is prevalent in Iraq, right? And so that is when you're looking at the state law, that is an option there to follow. And so this is one that will be guided by the ulama. So it's like saying, do I want the state to dictate my affairs or do I want the mosque to dictate my affairs?
Could it be both?
No, you pick one.
Okay.
And so you can look up stats and, look, everyone's got internet access. We live in the world of ChatGPT. Type it in, ask the question, and you'll come up with some really interesting stats of how many young girls between the age of 20 and 24 today were married before the age of 18. And then you could look even further and how many were married before the age of 15. And since this law has come in last year, the numbers have shot up. Right? So we can talk about the root of it, but the practice is really where I think our focus should be our focus should be, because there is something that is enabling it, whether it's correct or incorrect, it is there, and that is a reality that we need to address.
I see, thank you. And actually with the Afghanistan, we talk about tribal culture, and after the regime comes, there's a lot of, the Islamic countries that condemned, saying that this is un-Islam. So I think, that's the elements there, but also the seeds that embrace the tribal idea to grow. And Paul, would you like to come into that?
Yeah, it's very troubling. I mean, we put out a fatwa some years ago from the Association of British Muslims, and we're not an organisation that generally puts a lot of fatwas out. We prefer discussions like this and people to come to their own conclusions. But this was such a serious one that we actually put a fatwa out from a Sunni and a Shia scholar who put this together against female genital mutilation. And it's something which, it's not from Islam, and although it is practiced by a lot of Muslims, which is very troubling. Why is this? Well, I think probably it comes from the fact that Islam generally has been quite a tolerant religion. So when it went into one place to another place, as I mentioned to my friend here, that it tended to look at what the local culture was doing, and if things were locally acceptable, then they let them be. They didn't try to just get rid of everything. Or if they wanted to change it, they'd try and do it slowly rather than overnight. The problem is, this doesn't just work with Indonesian batik shirts and, other things. It's allowed things like, niqabs and burqas to proliferate in Islam. And yet I can prove to you, these are not from Islam. You can pick up a Bible and look in Genesis, And that's thousands of years before the Prophet Muhammad. And I can show you a description in there of what is basically either a niqab or a burqa, because it mentions that it completely covered the woman's identity, and that even her relative couldn't tell who she was. So what else could it be? But the thing is, these things have been allowed to persist. Now, in the past, people were not so well educated, and we've got to put ourselves into a mindset where these things were normal, and unfortunately, they still are normal in the minds of people from certain places. But that doesn't mean they're right. That doesn't mean that it should be allowed to continue. And that's where all of us have a role to educate people and highlight the harm and the danger in these things. And, you know, female genital mutilation, FGM, is one of them. And, you know, these sort of enforcing of burqas and things which, you know, hide people's identity and making that like that's some kind of normal dress is another one. And there are others as well. And we need to work on these things and look at what, especially where they don't even come from Islam and they predate Islam, why are Muslims doing it? And it's very shocking. I was aware of the law that changed in Iraq. And it worried me at the time, but the fact that you've mentioned that you've done some research and found that the marriages have shot up under the age of 15, what the heck is going through these people's heads? I mean, I have 3 daughters, one of them is only 10. And even my middle daughter, who's 14, I wouldn't think of marrying them off or anything. I mean, as far as I know, she hasn't even, you know, my older 2 haven't even had boyfriends. You know, and it's like, well, my oldest maybe if she had a friend as a boy, possibly. And I, you know, whatever, it's her business. But my middle daughter, I don't think she has. And but she, you know, she's a girl, so you never know. She's a smart girl. But certainly, I mean, it's like not getting married or anything. I mean, that is something which requires serious commitment, and you have to be ready for. And you know what this is based on? It's based on what they use, because I will say what they use, because I think, you know, child marriages have existed in many places, and not just among Muslims. I mean, even in America today, there are people in some states in America, some girls are getting married as young as 10 and 11. Even though that goes against the federal laws, but in some states they have these laws. And in that case, it's often Christian groups that are actually keeping that in place and not standing against it. And yet that isn't what you would normally expect from Christianity. But the thing is, we have to be vigilant about these things and, you know, push for people's rights and ensure that they're respected.
Okay, sorry, could I just come in? Sure, wouldn't a lot of people say that they are deriving this either from the Quran, the Hadith, or the Sunnah?
Well,
and propagating it forward, because I'm thinking about what you've just said, and I'm thinking about inheritance laws and the discrepancies there. States that
there are
inheritance
laws, it's true.
You know, where there's so many places where women can't even get passports, you know, without their husband's permission, and so much is controlled by the male relative in their lives. And in each and every instance, it goes back to it's either from the Quran, it's either from a Hadith, or it's from a Sunnah. It's from the Sunnah. And so that is the backbone that when you question what people will lean into, right? And I know you've shown us different hadiths, but this is what people will always go back to.
They will do. And even what I do the same thing, because I point to the Quran and I point to the Sunnah, you know, to reference what I do. And, you know, anybody who's looked at my work knows it's well referenced. And I actually check the references from the actual books, not just things I've read on the internet. But, yeah, of course they do. They try and justify it in that way. I mean, just like I mentioned with the American Christian groups that are, you know, still supporting like child marriage, and even though, you know, the KKK use Christian narrative in order to promote their hatred of Jews and black people and make out they're inferior people. This is not something that we're generally aware of in this country because we don't have the KKK, but it is true, you can check it. And so people that have a particular religion, they tend to trace things back to that religion and use that to justify. There is one hadith I'm aware of about Aisha supposedly being 9 when she married the Prophet. But this is actually contradicting a number of other accounts that prove that she could not possibly have been 9 when she married the Prophet. There are 2 articles that I've put out, one by Shaykh Dawud Rossa Owen and one by another Shaykh, that have actually highlighted this and gone through the actual hadiths, which detail certain things in her life that happened at certain times. And from that, you can work out the chronology of her life. She could not possibly have been 9 when she got married. Yet why is this being pushed? Why isn't this just being put aside and said, this is obviously an erroneous narration that should never even have been there, and it's like just disregarding it? This is a problem. What kind of mindset is looking for, you want to marry a girl at 9? Because this is the real problem. It's not the hadith. It's actually the mindset that you're looking for that, and you want to marry girls off before they're ready. I mean, it's crazy.
I think we have discussed briefly before about we got to understand the context of when someone taking some verses from the text and say to justify the actions, right? You mentioned, like, we'll see the context. The same thing can go to the A and to the B conclusion, which is total difference with the same line on that. Yeah. So I think we better see kind of the sources of the misogyny come from, and still we seen what's happening in Iraq, in Afghanistan, as we mentioned about education, that women and girls are banned from education, from work, and even get treatment from the medical, like a male doctor, and that make them impossible to get any treatment, basically because no female doctor.
We've taken away midwifery
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, in that sense, and just now we talk about marriage, as you said, at age of 9, and many more that we see the examples on the news. So my next question to you, Paul, I like you to help us have a better categories, better knowledge to say if someone say this happened because of the text, the interpretation, so on, you can say, no, like you do, you have another one. Something that makes it firmly knows what we can respond.
I think the important thing on this that people forget is a very simple point, that every surah, which is what we call a chapter of the Quran, begins with 3 words: Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind. Now, if something isn't compassionate and isn't kind, why did God in the Quran, according to what our belief is, associate himself with these 2 names? And also those 2 names, Rahman and Rahim, they come from a root word in Arabic which means womb, which is identifying with women. It's actually feminine. Why would God associate himself with these 2 names? It's because Islam is supposed to be kind. It's supposed to be compassionate and supposed to be kind. The Prophet himself is called in the Quran, Rahmatan lil Alameen, which means the mercy to all of the world. So if we're not being merciful, if we're not being kind, then I read that there's something wrong in the narration. It should not be cruel. It should not be cruel or oppressive towards anyone. In fact, oppression itself is also spoken of very strongly in the Quran as something which God does not like and condemns. So, a lot of this, as you mentioned, tribal narratives and tribal things, that maybe some of it predates Islam. Some of it was already there, and it's been there for a long time. It's like in Afghanistan, they follow Pukhtunwala, don't they? Pushtunwala. It's this kind of code of the Pushtuns that goes back a very, very long way before Islam. Some of it is compatible with Islam, some of it actually contradicts Islam. And in that society, they're going to follow that code rather than what Islam says, because it is so deeply ingrained. And I'm sure if we looked at other communities, we'd find similar things. There is in Africa, somewhere around by, I think that area between Mali and Algeria and Morocco, somewhere south of, in the Sahara, there is actually a tribe there where the women are in charge. It's the exact opposite. It's not a patriarchy, it's a matriarchy, and the men have to cover. So it's like, and they're Muslims. So it's like, how can they be Muslims? And they would, if you ask them, they would tell them it's very authentic. But they clearly have very different practices from what some Muslims have elsewhere. And I already mentioned Indonesia, which I'm not saying any of these are perfect models either. I'm just saying they're different. So it's like, if this was something that all Muslims had to follow, you would not find these differences. And I'm talking about some historical things here to give, as you said, context. But it's also very important. We live in 2026. We do not live 1,000 years ago. We do not live 1,500 years ago. So we should be looking for what makes sense in the current society. I actually said to a Hindu chaplain here that in our conversation before this, that Sharia is actually taken from the Quran, the Sunnah, and local custom. Very, very important. This is why if you go to Indonesia and you see how the Muslims, Islam is practiced there, it's actually not just practiced there one way, it's practiced there different ways depending on the province and the community. And historically, I know those of you from Indian heritage will know that this was historically true in India for different Muslim communities in India. It wasn't like a blanket situation everywhere. And you also had the Bhakti movement that came out, which Sikhism came out of, which was also looking at Hindu and Muslim sages. So it's like clearly it's practiced differently in different places. And this is because of this local custom element. And what that also means is today in Britain, if a scholar does not understand not just Quran and Sharia, but local custom, they're actually unqualified. It also means anywhere in the modern world where our customs are changing. If you go to any of our modern cities, we do not live how we did even 100 years ago, even 50 years ago. So if you don't understand the local custom now and what is regarded as normality now, you are unqualified. And that should include the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, I went to a conference in 2023 in Indonesia where they were actually looking to codify the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into fiqh, into Islamic jurisprudence. And that was led by Nadatul Ulama, and they had scholars who came from all over the world to participate in that. So there are movements to do these sorts of things, and I believe that is the way we should be going. But at the same time, I'm not saying that this is what Islam is. This is something that we're working to try to make sure it is. But at the same time, we have these issues that are some really deep-seated problems that need to be dealt with in some Muslim communities. But don't see that like all Muslims are the same and think the same on this, because there are different perspectives.
Thank you for you. Do you want to dissect on that, or I go to the last
30
question?
seconds. That's a really refreshing take. And, that last bit that you said about integrating local customs is so important. Because I think about living here in Britain, there's so much that we should embrace that my experiences run counter to. So when we spoke last week, I told you about how I was taught that the Prophet was an anti-culturalist. And the one thing that we were taught, not just in madrasa, but also through sermons, so the majlis, where the Maulana would come on stage, you sit on the mimbar and then speak. He would say that we need to abandon cultural differences and unify. And that was the objective of being a good Muslim. It's to not have variances between us. So in our mosque, we had Indian Muslims, we had Pakistani Muslims, we had Arab Muslims. We would celebrate Muharram and different events differently. And the whole purpose was you must unify and eliminate these differences between you and abandon your Britishness, your Indianness, your Pakistaniness, and come together. And so actually, what I was taught in England was to abandon that local nuance that you've just called out. And it's so interesting because we almost have like the ideal versus the practice.
Quite, and this is the thing with a lot of things where practice isn't necessarily what it should be, and we need to pull it up and say, well, there are reasons that it should be like that. It should be better. And I mean, the Wali Songo, the founding saints of Islam in Indonesia, they took this very seriously. People like Sunan Kalijaga, who was actually a local, and he used the local puppetry and even telling the story of the Ramayana and just tweaking it very slightly, but keeping the story going, even when the community became majority Muslim. And today, across Indonesia, they still tell the story of the Ramayana, and they still use the shadow puppets to do it in a very traditional way. And they've just made very slight tweaks to sort of emphasize certain themes in that story that also resonate with Islam. But they carried on doing it. And they weren't originally from Indonesia. Sunan Kalijaga was, but some of the early ones were not. They were from other places in the Muslim world who went there, but they still did this. And you've got the case of Imam Shafi, that when he was in Cairo and when he went to Jerusalem, he would give a different fatwa to each community because he understood the context of each community and they did things differently. And so what may have been relevant in Cairo is not necessarily relevant in Jerusalem. And today we have a similar situation with modern laws. What might be relevant in Singapore in common law is not necessarily relevant in Britain or vice versa, because there's little differences.
Thank you for. I have one last question before we open to the floor. But on what we just discussed, I just have some observations that we talk about the local custom, and in Britain, the place of as you know, human dignity and liberty. Interesting that the local custom of Britain have the kind of Islam that you have seen, that unity and cut out identity and keep everything unified rather than plurality. That I found it quite interesting. And on my last question, quickly, that can you tell me how can Muslim and non-Muslim together, how can we support women's rights that not only in Islamic countries but also within the Muslim community in the UK? It could be long, but please keep it short and sweet. All first, please. Oh, okay. Sure.
I think exactly what we're doing this evening,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about it, discuss it, bring minds together that have different experiences and let that churn happen, right? Because the worst thing we can do is be silent, right? We will give up women's rights like this. And as Paul said, what's next, right? I think we need to move to a world where women's rights aren't tradable, they're not disposable, they're not something that we will say it's okay for a woman to be a second-class citizen. Lock, stock, barrel, we have to say that that is not okay. And we can only do that through discussion, but then also making our voices known, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there are protests happening in Iran at the moment for what is happening. It's illegal, you get imprisoned, and there's obviously lots that happens.
Yeah.
But all of these places will only respond to power and change, right? Right, like pressure.
Yeah.
And so each of us, I suppose, has a responsibility in that. Our silence will make us complicit, I guess, is my message. And so talking about it, raising our voice and making it known, I think, is the start. And challenging it when we do come across it.
I feel like, yes, that we will speak out and voice for women's rights. At the same time, there could be some, feelings, the fear of being anti-Muslim. You are touching something that's holy. And Paul, what would you say that how can we move beyond that frozen mindset?
Well, I mean, this is why we at the Association of British Muslims were very concerned about the government's definition on Islamophobia that they proposed, because that would shut people up and they would be scared of committing what was effectively portrayed as racism.
Yeah.
Look, if I say something about you or something about, which I'm not going to do, because of your ethnic background, that's racist. If I treat you differently because of that, that's racist. If I question your ideas of Buddhism, that's not racist. That's questioning. And as long as I do it in a respectful way, then we should be able to have that conversation. And equally, people should be able to discuss the ideas, because Islam basically is a collection of ideas, should be able to question them and test them. And I believe that is absolutely vital, not just for freedom of speech and stuff, but actually for the health of Islam. I believe Islam suffers when it's not put to the test, when it's not questioned. My first Shaykh, Sufi Abdullah in Birmingham, actually taught me, one of the first things he asked me, he says, do you have any questions? And I didn't at the time, because they'd actually somehow been answered. But you know how things can happen in such a way that they're already answered. But I did afterwards. But and he said to me, it's very important because you learn through asking questions. The Quran itself actually asks questions. It says, surely in this are signs for people who use their reason. Well, that means Allah's asking us to use our brains, to use our reason, to question things. And also there's mentioned in the Quran, interestingly, about people who were doing what their forefathers were doing. A group of people were being spoken to by a prophet, and he asked them why they're doing what they're doing, and it says, we're just doing what our forefathers did. And Allah says in the Quran, why are you doing what your forefathers did when your forefathers didn't know any better? I mean, how relevant is this to our discussion now? The things that we discuss in the horrible practices that should not be happening in 2026. It's literally because people are doing things that they saw their forefathers doing, and they've just carried it on.
Thank you.
So the Quran actually condemns that clearly, and we should move on from that. And I agree, discussions like this, they really help. I mean, this is why We've organised things in Parliament and organised groups like this at the university and at various other places so we can have these conversations. And thank you for, bringing them and sharing your experience.
Thank
I
you.
think I've also just realised it's a 2025 year, 26.
Yeah, so far it's been a really, really thoughtful discussion, and now it's time to open the discussion to the audience. So, yes, please, I see some hands. So some housekeeping rules. Please raise your hands, like some of you do now, and keep your question short and sweet, and wait for the mic to come. And if you have any specific speaker to ask, do let us know, or else I hope you don't mind having me pick. Okay, first of all, Pawar, please could you...
It's a dab, isn't it?
And we will take 2 questions at the same time. Yeah. Yes, please.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much both for this very insightful dialogue. I've got a couple of questions, one for Aislinn and one for Paul. Aislinn, my name is Rola Alusi. I'm an Iraqi Muslim. I'm here with my Iraqi friend, Christian Iraqi friend. So we're very interested in this conversation. But my question is that specifically to do with what you call the surveillance culture. And I'm really sorry to hear your experience, because as a Muslim, as a devoted Muslim, I don't wear hijab, I don't wear niqab. I've been to Umrah. I do my 5 times prayer every day, alhamdulillah. But I've never experienced what you experienced. I've never been to school in terms of madrasa. I've been educated in Islam through my parents. My concern is that what I face here in the UK as a British Iraqi Muslim is that nobody understands that I can be the way I am as a Muslim, and somebody actually questioned me, why do you smoke? I used to smoke. Why do you smoke? You're a Muslim, you're not allowed. So this misconception and misunderstanding of Islam, don't you think that what you experienced and what people perceive Islam as being the way, what the general public, let's say, see Islam as something cultural, like the female, I can't say, FGM, that one, and also other matters, is it not cultural? The focus, the way they horrified you as a child, this is horrific. I mean, when I wanted to be, it is absolutely. And you also mentioned that the law being passed by the Jafari law. I was there in Iraq when this was proposed, and I was invited on different channels to talk about this. And just to let you know, as an Iraqi, as a person who was there when the law was proposed, it was being rejected by the public, not the politicians, because of the corruption, the situation. The law was being put forward because of the post-invasion impact on the community, on the country.
The original law was actually put forward by Iraqi feminists in the first place in 1959.
But it was not practiced. When I was in Iraq, I've lived in Iraq most of my life. Okay, but when it was proposed recently, into 2023, even jewelers, I saw this with my own eyes, had signs outside the shop saying, we will not sell dowry or give dowry to any child or any person who is buying for children. Okay, this is because of corruption. So please set this aside from your bad experience. But my question again, when can we isolate culture from religion? And
yes,
just going back to Paul, I just really want to appreciate how you put forward that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran, stated that you need to use our brain. For me, I absolutely agree with you. I agree with this statement, and I've decided personally to choose the Islam that I understand and I interpret. I'm highly educated, and I think I can interpret. I don't need somebody to tell me what to do. So I practice religion this way. But culture, please,
yes,
what do you think?
We do have a quick question. Before that, can I take a quick question? We'll come to you. Over there, please. Yeah. Yes. First, and then come and for another round.
Thank you very much for your time this evening. I had a question around how do you respond to approaches that certain countries have around laws engaging with aspects that, by some interpretations, but not by others, might be an aspect of Islam, such as laws in France against the banning of head coverings. For them, it's an idea about upholding values of laicite as part of sort of the government. There are obviously valid criticisms of Islamophobia in response to those approaches by the state. And then on the other hand, there are concerns about the rights of women, and particularly young girls, who find themselves wearing head covering in situations that may be troubling for them and for others, sort of as part of their community.
Got you. So first question, Aislinn, and second, if you don't mind, okay? Please.
Yeah, so, it's actually a question I pondered on quite a lot, right? As a young person, I had a lot of questions, right? And I was very quickly told questions are only allowed to a limit, and that's another story that I won't delve into. When I pondered on this question of culture, I was like, is it just me? Is it just the house I've been brought into? Is it just the community I've been brought into? And Onitra, you and I spoke about it. I actually went to Iran as a child and was able to experience the culture there for a whole month. And again, I won't delve into that, but what I came to the conclusion of was I read stories of many ex-Muslims and many people who remained Muslim from different cultures. So Ayan Hirsi Ali, Yasmin Muhammad. So we're looking at the African culture, we're looking at the Egyptian culture, and we're looking at me, who was born in Britain, raised in Britain, but have ties back to India. We all have common stories, common experiences. The only thing that bound us together was that we were born in Islam. It wasn't our culture or where we were born or the type of Islam we grew up in. There was a variance there. And the more I read about different stories, the more I met people, that was solidified. And I'm really happy that you have a form of Islam that you can practice that is plural and liberal for you. But that did not correlate with my experience, but it also doesn't correlate with thousands of women, right? Thousands of women who are leaving Islam, some, at the danger of their life. Apostasy, again, one of the things that you're taught quite early on, leaving Islam is punishable by death.
Terrifying.
Yeah, right? I changed my name, my identity. I started all over again as a teenager in the UK. I feared for my life. That is not something that was made up, right? It was something I was taught systematically, something that my parents enforced into me. So yes, there are cultural aspects that play into it, but there are enough examples and data points that show that the commonality is not culture and the root alone is not culture, in my point of view.
Thank you. Cool. You have some quick reflections on the question?
On this one...
Yeah. Okay. Different question, please.
Yeah, different question.
Yeah. You have some more and we wrapped up. Please.
Gosh, sorry, I was assisting.
What was the question? What was the question?
France, of course, sorry. No, I mean, obviously, as a British person, I don't subscribe to what they do in France. It really concerned me when I found out that even like showing crosses or, like any kind of, not just head coverings, it's so many things, it's really frowned upon in France, which I find really odd because historically they're a Catholic country. And I think Catholics should be able to practice their faith, and to be able to show it and not hide it from people. I understand what their concerns are. And, I think to have some kind of concept of parameters that we shouldn't go beyond is probably a good idea. But what those parameters are have to be quite carefully thought out, and they have to be, you have to take into account the views of people from all across society. So, I mean, I would question the governance on that as to how they go about things. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. For our next couple questions, okay. First, for yes, please. Gentleman there. Short and sweet, please, everyone.
Sure, yeah. Hi, Paul, this is for yourself. So on the one hand, we've got the verse you said about the forefathers one, okay? And so it's effectively saying, let's not just maintain what forefathers have done.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we've got this idea that you proposed that one needs to also be aware not just of the Sunnah, etc., but of also custom.
Yes.
Now, in principle, there's how do we reconcile this? Because there's effectively that custom is the practice of the forefathers. And so it's a nice idea what you're saying, but in reality, how does that work itself out? Because what if those customs go against Islam, and whose version of Islam?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So the fact is, it's one can understand if you have somebody, an imam somewhere, who says no, XYZ practices, sorry, they're not acceptable, whatever the custom may be. And so, according to, what's the yardstick? Who decides what is halal, what's haram, what's kufra? So it's a nice idea, but in practice, how is that actually?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very good question, and I'm glad you raised it. The thing is, it shouldn't. Cultural practices shouldn't be things which are harmful. And this is also where reason comes in. That we should use our reason and not just blindly do things if they're harmful. Being harmful is something which within fiqh is quite a serious thing. Things that harm you actually are haram. It's like, this is why the view of many scholars around smoking, it used to be regarded as makruh. Makruh, why? Because they didn't think it killed you. But then when scholars found out that actually cigarettes are scientifically proven to kill, many modern scholars have changed their ruling and says it's haram because it kills. So things that kill and things that harm, and obviously with FGM, this is something that clearly is very, very harmful. It should not be allowed.
Just an extension, what about in terms of the Muslims' attitude, the Mormons' attitude to kuffar, for example?
It's an interesting one you raised there as well. Nahdlatul Ulama in Indonesia actually outlawed using the word kuffar and said that, in today's world, people are citizens. The original concept of kuffar was people who rejected guidance, rejected good sense, rejected laws and reason and human dignity. It was for these reasons that they were put aside as a category aside. In a modern society, you have citizens. I'm paraphrasing that argument, but it went along these lines. And they said citizens today have rights and responsibilities. And again, a lot of the problems that we discussed today are people asking for their rights, and also we have responsibilities. We preserve those rights by fulfilling our responsibilities. So very important points.
Can you that? And we'd like to get 3 more questions. At the first place, I know that, and you, okay, 3. And any more hands? Lovely, we have 3 more questions. 4.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Very quickly, first of all, apologize if you find it slightly complaining or negative question, but very simple. If something wrong happens in the world, something adharma, something not good should happens, like terrorist attack or anything, I haven't seen the 2026 Muslims, or say slightly improved version of the Muslims, which you are preaching in, and the group of the ex-Muslims and all, they are coming out and boldly opposing all these things. No, I haven't seen these groups coming out and saying that, hey, we are against this Islamophobia definition. We will not support you, this kind of thing.
Looking at my social media channels. One thing you have to be very careful of now with social media is what you look at, the algorithms reinforce. We did this thing, after October the 7th, a few months later, we got some young Jews and some young Muslims together at Wolf Institute in Cambridge. And everybody had to listen to each other first time round. So when the person spoke, everybody had to listen. They all got about 5 or 10 minutes. And what come out, I'm not going to go into all of that, but what come out is they showed their phones. And on the TikTok of the Jews, it was all Israel's narrative. The TikTok of the Muslims, it was all about Gaza. And it's like, on mine, it was different. It was a mixture of all sorts of things, because I look at all sorts of things. And I highlighted the point there that, how this was actually controlling what they're thinking. So just be careful what you look at, and, search for things as well. We put out a fatwa on FGM some years ago that was on the Home Office website. Did you see that? It was on the Home Office website.
Sorry, I may need to get. I'd like to take 3 questions at a time, and then we wrapped up, okay? Please.
So this is for both or either of you. I work as a doctor in women's health in a very densely populated city. And it's almost a weekly occurrence to have women who are accompanied by men fully clad, who refuse to be seen by anyone who's male, who actually give birth against guidance because at home, who are high-risk pregnancies because they don't want to be treated by men, and who actually nominate their male partners as their advocate to the point that the male partner can say, she's bleeding out, but I don't want anyone treating her because it's my right to do so. And in the name of autonomy, we have to allow that. And women bleed out 2 liters, a third of their blood volume. And these are the one common occurrence out of all the root languages they speak is that they have the native British accent. So these are not ideas transplanted from the country they've come in. These are ideas that are homegrown. So my question is, at a macro level, how do we ensure that women can be protected at the end of the day for their life?
And on that, can I take 2 more questions and then yes, please. And here, please, our front. Thank you, Favora. Thank you.
Thank you. My question is around surveillance. So being from Leicester, so I'm originally from Leicester, I've been around a very diverse community. And my view is that level of surveillance is seen in the South Asian community, whether me being a Hindu, it's seen at a young age. You have your aunties, your cousins, always looking at what you're doing, in that sense of making sure if you're okay. But what I saw with a lot of my Muslim friends was that level was 10x'd. The level of surveillance was 10x'd. And then the punishment for that was 10x. So my view is, why do you think in South Asian communities, and particularly the Muslim community, that level is greater in Islam compared to how I had it as a Hindu? And going to my British-born friends, their level was practically, there wasn't that surveillance, and they were able to sort of live a different sort of childhood to seen in South Asian community.
The surveillance.
I get the question.
Got you. Okay, and one last question. The gentleman over there, please. Yes.
Fascinating conversation. I really enjoying both of you and your views. One question, Paul. So after the October 7th, we had endless protests and weekly marches in cities across UK, USA, Australia against Israel. Yet no marches against what happened in Sudan or what's happening right now in Iran. What is happening? Why are these people, the students you spoke to in Cambridge, the people who are marching on the streets, why are they silent when there is a greater number of people being killed? Is it that if Muslims are killed by Muslims, it's perfectly okay? But if it's Muslims are killed by anyone else, it's not okay by the community? I mean, what is happening? I do not understand.
Okay, thank you for your questions. First, Aislinn, we'd like to tackle the first questions on the male doctor, the pediatric
So the question was, how do we prevent it effectively?
Under the name of autonomy.
Do what you're doing, challenge it. Right? I don't think there's much more that we can say except for actually raise that it's wrong. I think the quiet acceptance of it is what harms us. When we say this is a protected right because it's a religious right, that is problematic. Because at the end of the day, that is a woman, right, who has equal access in the eyes of the law here to her safety, her physical, her psychological safety, but also the safety of her unborn child in that moment, right? Bleeding out, you said 2-3 liters, that child could find themselves without a mother. So I think it's linking to a little bit of what you said, Paul, which is when something is wrong, call it out as wrong, and we can't hide behind a protection of it's something to do with religion. Wrong is wrong, and there should be no qualms about that.
Yeah, sure. And Paul, do you mind to tackle the questions?
I also want to comment on that as well.
Yes, come in on the
I think that needs to be changed legally. We need to push for a change in the law that ensures that that cannot happen. And the woman is actually met with female attendants at the hospital, and it's just not allowed for that situation to happen, because that is horrific. If you say it's a common occurrence, and if it's there, if that's happening in other parts of the country, that's really, really worrying.
Well, on that, my mother would never shake hands with a man because it's now mahram. So that idea is quite embedded.
But this goes beyond that. I mean, it's one thing not shaking hands, but actually not getting medical attention. This is serious. And actually, I mean, there's so many scholars that would actually say that this is haram to actually do that. To restrict medical help.
On surveillance.
Surveillance. I know what you're saying, and I've seen that in both communities. I have a lot of friends in both communities. And I have noticed it's took sort of, a good example, this sort of connected to this. If you notice, like within the British Hindu community, how many people broke away from the trades of their parents and went into other work? How many people actually intermarried with people from other communities? It tended to happen quicker than it did within the British Asian Muslim communities. It's happening now, but it was stepped. Why it is, I think maybe that was the influence of the mullahs and people that are too over the top in their approach to religion, maybe. You know, it's like not using reason, as I mentioned that the Quran actually says, not understanding the book itself, but actually just hanging off what they're being told, and then the social pressure that went around it, that what you highlighted, that then reinforces that and actually keeps it going. And it does need to change. It's unacceptable.
Sorry.
There was another...
Sorry, can I come in on the surveillance question?
Yeah.
Can I just briefly
Sure,
come in
yeah.
on the surveillance question? I think I was just trying to find the quote for what it's called in Afghanistan, but to your question, right, I don't necessarily think it's something that's just a South Asian problem specifically, right? The issue comes from, in my point of view, when you put an overemphasis on a woman's virginity and her virtue, right? A lot of the places we've spoken about today, if a woman is a virgin, who she can marry and her right to marry is still dictated by her father or her guardian. It's embedded into law in places. And what I think we're seeing in this microcosm, but then also extrapolated, where we have morality police or the Ministry of Propagation of Virtue and Prevention of Vice in Afghanistan, that's what I was looking for. These are systems, state apparatus that is set up to control women and their sexual freedom and putting that responsibility on men. So when that becomes a core value and you want to control that for whatever reason, you then give birth to a surveillance culture, which is we are going to suppress this, we are going to keep control over it. So it actually makes absolute sense to me why you experienced it as 10x, because it is something that is overemphasized, it's something that is discussed, it's something that is taught on a regular basis, that this should not happen, and then you bring in shame culture around it and honor culture around it, which is also in these places embedded into the law.
I would agree with that, yeah. That's accurate.
On the October 7th, that's why the questions that why people react less or very no with what's happening in Iran and vice versa?
I think the thing, and you're absolutely right, and I've seen this, and it's very troubling. I mean, and you've got to look at who organises these marches as well. Friends of Al-Aqsa, does that ring a bell? Do you know who they are? Exactly. It's like, so they're people with a very clear agenda, and they've been pushing that for decades. So what you've got is, they've been going around just making out that they are just caring for the Palestinians. And who doesn't care for the Palestinians? I want the Palestinians to have a future and a peaceful future as well, and to have a prosperous place in Gaza and in West Bank, of course. But the thing is, I don't want to promote Hamas, I don't want to promote, you know, extremism and terrorism and this sort of thing. But a lot of people who go into these things, they don't know that. But then the social pressure around it is pushing them that they have to take part. And then many of those people who are involved in that are not Hamas. They are not extremists, but they're just people who care. But then this group, Friends of Al-Aqsa, do they ever organise anything when it's Yemen or when it's Sudan or when it's anything else? Of course they don't, because they only care about their one issue. That's how they get their money. And so they push that.
But the thing is, it's the non-Muslims and the non-Palestinians who are taking part in this on massive numbers. Students who are not even
A lot of them are not even Muslims, it's true,
And why are they concerned about what Israel does, but not caring when others are being impacted?
Exactly. A human life is a human life, whoever they are. I mean, it pains me when I see, you know, a bus full of young Jewish school children blown up, or whether I see, you know, what's happened in Gaza and places utterly flattened. You know, these are people suffering at the end of the day, whoever they are and wherever they're from. I mean, we actually spoke out what was happening in Bangladesh with the Hindu community there, and, you know, highlighted it when very few others were doing it. But it's no difference, you know, to us. It's people are people, and no one should be being persecuted.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and we are running out of time and a little bit late already. First and foremost, thank you, both of you, again, for sharing your thoughts, and thank you all for coming here today. And I think the key takeaway for tonight's talk is that that we now see that Islam, and in fact, in many other traditions, they are not black and white, but we see the complexity, diversities, and its own context, local context there. So once we understand this and we understand the different trajectories come from, I believe that we now feel more encouraged to discuss and at times critiques issues over what's happening in the Middle East, in the Islamic country, within its tradition. And at the same time, why we acknowledging this complexity, I also believe that we know that this is not moral relativism. So far, it's very clear from both of you, from the audience, that regardless of what tradition it is, but what we do believe, and we stand firmly on the core fundamental values of human dignity and equality. So thank you all for coming, and I will let you go very soon. So everything you hear now is about promoting our events and ourselves. We'll be very quick. Okay, so everything you see here is via charity. So if you want to support us, you can follow us on LinkedIn. I think there will show up. Yes, so you can scan the link in here, and if you want to get closer to our center, you can become our member. And by this, you can get access to our private roundtables. We have a lot more. And you can also get access to our modern India lab on the ground floor. So it's a beautiful working space that you can use. And our next event is on next Thursday, actually. So it is the launch of our new report paper on participatory and deliberative democracy in the digital age. So we are looking at how citizen participation that beyond elections can strengthen democracy in the changing digital world. And this paper is authored by Pavar over there. So he is our head of the Strengthening Democracy Desk. And that next week conversation will be a conversation with Dr. Ansgar Kone. He is a global AI ethics and regulatory leader from Ernst & Young. So please stay tuned and register to our event. On our next K lecture will be on 25th of February. Next month, same time, 6:30, and also the one next week. It will be on the interfaith and community cohesion, past, present, and future. So it will be a discussion panel that we talk about what's happened the 2 decades of interfaith dialogue. What have we achieved? What the current challenge we are facing? And it will consist of the academia, theologians, and interfaith initiative leaders. And each of them come from different faith tradition. So again, it will be a very interesting event, and please stay tuned. So again, thank you so much for coming today, and do chat networkings, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you.